You are listening to the Information Security Innocent Podcast, episode 46, originally released on February 25th, 2021. I'm your host, Josh Amishav. Just for this week, we're going to switch the format a bit. The goal of this episode is to give you a curated and concise summary of the latest InfoSec news. Next week, we'll go back to the regular format. So let's get to it. The Biden administration is preparing sanctions against Russia in response to the SolarWinds hack, as well as poisoning Navalny. We covered the SolarWinds hack a few weeks ago, but essentially, it was a supply chain attack where the attackers infected a piece of signed code that eventually executed on target machines further down the chain who rely on SolarWinds functionality. Alex Verzon blogged about a similar supply chain issue in programming language package managers. So for example, when you run a command like pip install and whatever package name, the package manager automatically installs any dependencies required. Python has PyPy, Node has npm, and Ruby has gems. The issue is, when you install a package from any of these sources, you're essentially trusting the publisher to run code in your machine. There's no guarantee that the code isn't malicious. A couple of years ago, there was an interesting piece of research published that exploited typo squatting package names. So, similar to creating domain names with intentional spelling mistakes, you could create library packages that were named something similar to another popular package name, which if a programmer misspelled the dependency name, they ended up installing your malicious code. In any case, Alex wondered what happened if, say, an npm package.json file referenced an internal dependency, but an external version with the same name existed as well. So he scoured the internet for source code that referenced both internal and external library dependencies and found quite a few. And I should note that the only companies with public bounty programs were targeted. Next, he created Node, Python, and Ruby packages named after the internal dependencies he found, and uploaded them to the various package repos like PyPy and Ruby gems. The packages phoned home via DNS when they were installed. So just as an example, Node packages run a pre-install script where you can execute code automatically during the installation process. So within hours of uploading the malicious packages, they were automatically installed and started phoning home. Turns out what happens at a high level behind the scenes is that package managers check if the library exists on a specified internal index, then check if the library is available on a public index, and then installs whichever version number is higher. So all you need to do is create a high version number to force install your malicious libraries. And Alex was awarded pretty significant bounties from places like Shopify, Apple, PayPal, Netflix, and Uber for this find. Some egregor users were arrested in Ukraine this week. Now, it's not the actual egregor gang. They created a ransomware as a service platform. So essentially, they ran out the ransomware and then enable other cyber gangs to use their platform to break into their targets and encrypt their data. The gang which deployed the malware keeps most of the ransom paid, and a small cut is kept by the egregor folks. Kenna Security published a report based on their data that only 2.6% of vulnerabilities discovered are actually used in the wild. We had Ed Bellis on a while back who basically reiterated this back then. But as opposed to the portrayal that the internet is the Wild West, it looks like there are really only a small number of vulnerabilities that are being actively exploited at a given time, which means that prioritizing the right vulnerability mitigation will go a long way. The Lazarus Group, which is a North Korean hacking crew, has been accused of stealing $275 million worth of cryptocurrencies from a Singapore-based exchange called KuCoin. What's interesting here is that Chain Analysis, which is a blockchain analysis company, was able to attribute the attack to the Lazarus Group based on how the stolen funds were laundered, meaning when malicious users steal crypto, they send it to mixers, which mix the money into different accounts, which makes it harder to trace. But the size and the way the funds were sent to the mixers were very specific, sort of like a fingerprint, which makes the attribution possible. While password managers like LastPass are dropping their free tier, Dropbox is entering the market with their own password management tool called Dropbox Passwords. Now, there's still a number of free alternatives on the market, and if you specifically want something that isn't cloud-based, I really like KeePassXC. I use it extensively and sync the password safes between my desktop, laptop, and mobile manually. Ars Technica has a story about China looking to limit the export of rare earth materials to harm the US military capabilities. Some of these minerals are critical components of the electrical power systems and magnets in F-35 fighter jets, and China controls about 80% of the world's supply of these minerals. ZDNet has a story about Flash refusing to die. The Flash player reached its end of life on December 31st, 2020, but Adobe let a local Chinese company to continue support Flash in China where it's still quite popular. Minerva Labs reported that they're detecting multiple attacks against the Chinese Flash clients, which I guess isn't surprising. Brian Krebs has a story about the leader of Mexico's Green Party who was removed from office due to allegations that he was involved in a Romanian ATM skimmer gang. The gang bribed ATM technicians to install a small Bluetooth-based skimming device inside the ATM itself. Unlike other skimmer devices, there were no externally visible parts that would tip you off that something wasn't right. On the other hand, Brian went down to Mexico and was able to identify which ATMs were hacked using a cheap smartphone. Proofpoint is suing Facebook to allow them to keep their lookalike domains, meaning Proofpoint owns several domains like facebook-login.com but without the E, or Instagram.net but instead of an M at the end, it's an R and an N, which looks like an M. The domains are used for phishing awareness training, so when you click on a link to those domains, it's quite obvious what they are. They're not trying to pretend to be Facebook or Instagram or anything. Yandex said that it caught an employee selling access to user inboxes. Yandex is like the Russian Google. They've notified close to 5,000 account owners that their accounts were compromised and data sold to third parties. And in a somewhat related story, a Florida-based phone company employee has been charged with conspiracy to commit fraud for his role in a SIM swapping attack. If you ever wondered how much it would cost to bypass two-factor authentication when SMS is supported as a secondary factor, that number is $2,325. That's how much you receive for swapping the targeted customer's SIM, which allowed the attacker to access the MFA token to authenticate to the victim's various web services. Alright, that's it for this week. Please let me know your thoughts on this format, though next week we're going to have a guest on the show and go back to normal. And if you have any comments or questions, then tweet at me at Jamoose. And if you got value from this episode, then please share it with a friend. See y'all next week.